People interested in true crime are always baffled by the why. Why would someone do these things? What path in life could possibly have led them to commit such atrocious acts? In this podcast, we aim to explore the upbringings and backgrounds of some of history's worst criminals, but with a twist. Because we want you to set aside what you already know about them, we won't use their names until the end of the show, so you can listen anew and hopefully get insight into the question that haunts us the most. Why did they do it? Join us as we explore the catalyst. The lawmen lay silently in the brush along the highway, their weapons at the ready. Their source had told them the wanted pair were due to drive down this dusty road sometime that day, so they'd been encamped since before dawn. The duo, whom we'll individually call Romeo and Juliet, not to romanticize them, but to keep their identities straight, had been down on their luck for days, running from the police in multiple states. On their way to what they thought was a safe house, the two had no idea that they had been sold out and death awaited them. Romeo's parents married on December 5th, 1891. Their greatest ambitions were owning a farm and raising a strong Christian family. Those were honest yet hard-to-reach dreams for any couple in East Texas. As the years passed and they entered the 20th century, babies arrived, all potential future farmhands for their father. Romeo was born in 1910, with his mother entering his date of birth as March 24th in the family Bible. As public records in rural areas were haphazardly kept, this record of a family Bible typically proved to be more accurate. Romeo was one of 7 children, 4 of them boys. Their lives were hard. As author Jeff Gwynne writes, nearly everything, including food and clothing, was challenging to find. Electricity and running water were luxuries that were unimaginable for even the wealthiest of rural Texans. The children didn't have separate beds. They rolled pallets out on the floor of the main living space each night. Romeo's mother, Kumi, was fighting 2 separate struggles, one for earthly survival and a second for eternal glory. As none of her children seemed interested in following in their father's farmer footsteps, she declared that they each needed an education. While the children had worked their farm during the harvest season and were hired as field workers at other farms, Kumi ensured they were in class as much as possible. Just as crucial to Kumi was her children's religious education, a faith ruled by fear. According to Kumi and the other fundamentalists in rural Texas, if you didn't follow the Bible to the letter, you'd go straight to hell. She made sure to remind her children of this daily. She frequently used the switch to punish her kids and ensure her message was heard. Any indiscretion in the child's legs would sport red welts from their mother's fervor. Even so, none of the 7 children grew up hating their mother. While a few of them grew to have many issues with the outside world, they knew they could count on each other. Most of the 7 children were typical East Texan country kids of the early 20th century. They did their chores, cherished their time to play, and appreciated the special treat of going to the moving picture show. They listened to their mother and attended both school and church without question. But 2 sons, Romeo and his brother Ivan, soon began to stray from the straight and narrow. Ivan started attending school, but his love of the outdoors called to him, and he played truant. He barely got through the 3rd grade before he dropped out altogether and was barely literate. Kumi at first took solace in the fact that Ivan was still attending church, but he eventually quit that too. Still, she had hope for our Romeo, who was younger than Ivan by 7 years. While Romeo didn't like school any more than his older brother, he stuck with it, and to his mother's delight, he seemed actually to enjoy attending church. At 14, he was saved and baptized at the Eureka Baptist Church, a crucial step in the life of any believer who hoped to cross the pearly gates. To complete this monumental step, he had to stand in front of the congregation and admit that he was a helpless sinner who wanted to accept Jesus into his life. But Romeo had concerning traits that worried Kumi. First of all, his hero was his big brother Ivan, and he enjoyed nothing more than bossing his younger siblings around. His personality was so forceful that everyone just went along with it. Just as concerning were the characters that he chose to play. It was always outlaws. He would be Jesse James or Billy the Kid of Wild West fame, while his siblings would be his gang members. They would make toy guns out of pointed sticks, running around town pretending to be part of the recent frontier violence. Romeo's temperament was also different from Ivan's. While Ivan would flash hot and then soon forget what had angered him, Romeo smoldered. According to Gwyn, Romeo remembered every slight and every insult against him, and forgiveness was not part of Romeo's character. When fights broke out, as Kumi expected of her boys, she worried about Romeo. When he thought he had no other choice but to fight, he lost control and went berserk. Using any weapon within his reach, Romeo showed no mercy, and if he lost the fight, he simply waited for the opportunity to get revenge. Romeo spent part of each year living with his Uncle Frank, his father's brother, at his farm in Corsicana, Texas. About 27 miles from their home in Tellico, the children were sent there for weeks, usually when the pantry was bare and funds were running low. But when they were in Corsicana, they were still expected to go to school and work the farm like they did at home. As if their lives weren't already hardscrabble, the end of World War I spelled disaster for small farmers like Romeo's family. During the war, European farming had ground to a standstill, creating a huge demand that fell on the shoulders of American farmers. But with the war's end, European farmers began producing again, dramatically decreasing the need for American crops. The farms that had expanded or increased their output faced mounting debt. Like many farmers, Romeo's father, Henry, refused to give up and moved to the cities. He was determined to make something out of his farm, but his children began to leave, with Romeo's eldest siblings leaving first. In 1920, when Romeo was now the oldest child at 12 in the home, a plague of boll weevils devastated crops that were already unsellable. Finally resigned to their fate, Henry and Kumi packed their remaining 3 children and their earthly belongings into a wagon and made the 30-mile journey north to Dallas. When the family arrived, Dallas was a rapidly expanding city with a population of more than 150,000, and it welcomed industrious, skilled workers. As Gwyn points out, Henry, as unskilled and illiterate, was not the kind of new resident the Dallas leaders were hoping for. Civic leaders held meetings on how to stem the tide of immigration from farm to city, with ideas like teaching the farmers how to make their farms more productive, which entirely missed the point. Rather than working on how to assimilate the new citizens, Dallas segregated them in an area east of the Trinity River. It was an unincorporated, semi-marsh area where the city allowed newcomers to squat out of sight, out of mind. 2 communities sprang up from this area. Cement City, where many people were employed by the nearby factories and were impacted by the pollution from said factories, and West Dallas, a collection of shanties with no industry at all. Unable to stay with their older children or find an alternative, Henry, Kumi, and their youngest children camped in West Dallas. They slept under the wagon without a tent, with their old white horse tied to it. If they scrounged something to eat, relying on the Salvation Army for goods, Kumi cooked it up on a camp stove. Henry picked up scrap metal and hauled it to the nearby foundries for very little money. Romeo split his time between the camp in West Dallas and his uncle's farm. Kumi preferred him on the farm as the camp was essentially lawless. With jobs at a premium, families resorted to the black market or sneaking across the river to steal what they needed from the more affluent side of the city. Dallas police patrolled the campground, arresting people simply on suspicion. Kumi believed Romeo was safer from this cesspool that had already claimed Ivan. Ivan had promised to go to work for his eldest brother Jack in his mechanic shop, but instead, he told his mother that he bought and sold poultry, which likely meant he stole chickens. Not even theft could provide enough of an income, so Ivan went to work for his father, finding scrap metal. Going through 2 marriages quickly, Ivan ended up hanging out with West Dallas's undesirables. Romeo still spent time at Uncle Frank's, but the exciting pull of his brother's life was hard to ignore. At 15, he told Kumi that he was staying in Dallas for good, eager to join Ivan on the seedier side of the city. Romeo topped out at 5 foot 6 inches tall and, at 16 years old, weighed only 125 pounds. Unsurprising given the lack of food available to the family, but still, he was a small kid. Determined to become a musician, he spent hours in the heart of the city, staring at instruments and other fine things he couldn't possibly afford. His window shopping often happened while he was supposed to be at Sydney Lanier High School. Kumi forced her 3 youngest to walk into Dallas daily to go to school, but once they were out of sight, the city's parks and skyscrapers called out to them. For Romeo, the city's women also caught his attention. His mother had warned him about women who wore makeup, but he couldn't stop staring. Hoping to find a girl of his own, Romeo became obsessed with his wardrobe, needing clothes to impress the girls he passed on the street. Formally dropping out of school at age 16, Romeo got a job at the Brown Cracker and Candy Company for $1 a day. It wasn't long before he realized that at that meager wage, he had reached the extent of his earning potential, and there wasn't much chance for him to advance far in life. The life he wanted, with fine suits that cost $20 and saxophones that cost nearly $40, was far out of his reach. To add insult to injury, few fathers allowed their daughters to date a factory worker from West Dallas. Frustrated, Romeo tried the traditional means of earning more money. He found a new job at Procter & Gamble, earning 30 cents an hour, or $18 for a 60-hour work week. Moving jobs again, he got a skilled job at United Glass Company, but heard stories from others in West Dallas who achieved their wealth through less legitimate means. They were getting money faster and easier than Romeo, and had more self-respect and time to enjoy their loot. Rather than jumping in all at once, he decided to keep his day job and dip a toe into the criminal world. His first known crime was stealing a chicken. Instead of being jailed, he was held until his parents were contacted, and he received a stern talking to. But he had had a taste now. Plus, he had a girlfriend, Eleanor Williams, whom he wanted to impress. Smitten, Romeo had her initials tattooed on his arm and specially made her a mirror with her initials engraved on the back at the glass factory. Soon, he told his friends they were engaged, but after a fight, she left the city to stay with relatives. Distraught, Romeo rented a car, an expensive feat, and drove to her, eventually reconciling. Unfortunately for him, he hadn't told the rental agency that he was taking the car out of town, and when he didn't return it on time, the agency contacted the sheriff. On December 3rd, 1926, Romeo was formally arrested for the first time, but since the agency had their car back, they decided not to press charges, and he was released. But now he had an official police record. Only 3 weeks later, he was arrested again, this time with Ivan. Ivan had asked Romeo to help him pick up a truckload of turkeys to be sold for the holidays. Police got a tip and arrested the brothers before they could unload the turkeys. Telling the police they didn't know they had stolen property, Ivan offered to take full responsibility to save his little brother. Romeo avoided jail time, but 2 arrests in less than a month told Dallas police he was someone to watch. Dallas County Deputy Ted Hinton wrote that the brothers were, quote, no accounts, end quote. While Romeo was still job hopping and looking for higher wages, he was now being pulled into the police station frequently on suspicion. He was not formally charged during this time, but the police never offered a ride back to the campground, leaving him to walk the miles back, the anger festering inside of him the entire way. He grew resentful over what he considered unfair harassment, and his mother worried that he was becoming a harder man because of it. He figured if the police were going to keep hauling him in anyway, he might as well commit some of the crimes they suspected him of and enjoy the proceeds. According to Gwynn, cars filled the streets of Dallas and became prime targets for young men like Romeo who wanted to make a lot of money in a hurry. By 1927, at only 17, he was stealing whatever vehicles he could, as a car in good condition could bring him $100 or more, which is more than $1,800 today. With money rolling in, he began to dress well and spend it around town, arousing even more suspicion from the police. On February 22, 1928, he was held in Fort Worth for an investigation, a charge that allowed them to hold him while they tried to find evidence that he committed a specific crime. Eventually released, Romeo began to believe he was untouchable. That feeling came to a screeching halt when he, Ivan, and a third man broke into a mechanic's shop and were interrupted by police. After crashing a Ford Model T into a curb, they ran on foot, the police shooting Ivan in the legs. Romeo managed to escape but believed his idolized brother was dead for hours before learning he had been arrested and charged with a robbery. Ivan was sent to prison and recovered from his gunshot wounds. As the 1930s began, Romeo, momentarily scared straight, spent time with his more congenial friends. On January 5, 1930, one of those friends invited Romeo to a party at 105 Herbert Street, where he would meet his Juliet. Like her Romeo, Juliet was born in a small Texas town in 1910. In a family memoir, Juliet's mother, Emma, described the infant as a beautiful baby with cotton-colored curls and the bluest eyes you ever saw. Her father, Charles, was a brick mason and, with a skilled trade, could provide a slightly better life for his family than Romeo's father, Henry. The family attended the First Baptist Church in Rowena, Texas, where Juliet thrived as the center of attention as early as 3 years old. She was chosen as one of several children to stand in front of the congregation and take solo turns singing their favorite hymns. But when it was Juliet's turn, she shocked the crowd by singing, "He's a devil in his own hometown," a honky-tonk tune. Around the same time, an uncle came to town and taught Juliet and her brother, Buster, how to swear. Charles didn't allow his children to even say darn, so Buster was immediately punished. However, according to Gwynn's book, Go Down Together, Juliet was just too cute to punish. In December 1914, when Juliet was just 4, Charles unexpectedly died. Emma packed up her 3 children and moved 240 miles east to Cement City, one of the slums outside of Dallas and next door to Romeo's West Dallas. The transition was difficult for Emma, as the move also meant a considerable step down in social standing and financials. In Cement City, she was just another woman scrambling to feed her children and keep a roof over her head. Though she didn't want to work, it wasn't an option in Cement City, and Emma got a job in a factory as a seamstress, likely earning about $9.50 per week. When she was at work, Emma's mother watched the children. As Gwynn puts it, Buster and Billie Jean were usually well-behaved, but Juliet was an adorable terror. Emma wrote that her middle child kept the household in chaos from morning to night, but stressed that nothing her daughter did was mean-spirited. Juliet set fires because she liked the pretty flames, and she stole wine from her grandfather's stash because it looked delicious. And for some reason, the adults around her didn't seem keen on discipline. As she progressed through school, her temper revealed itself. According to her mother, Juliet was willing to physically fight boys and girls over perceived snubs or stolen school supplies. And when the boys began to get crushes on her, she expected lavish gifts, learning that she liked being someone's girlfriend. Beyond wanting to be on a boy's arm, Juliet's dreams included seeing her name in lights on Broadway or on the silver screen. When she and her sister, Billie Jean, were made to go fishing each weekend, Juliet sang at the top of her lungs. At 15, she scraped together enough money to get her photo taken in the popular style of a glamour shot, with heavy makeup, short permed hair, and her eyes looking off in the distance. That photo became a talisman, symbolizing what she wanted to become and taunting her with the obstacles that stood in her way to get there. She wanted to see herself in the pages of photoplay, but scouts for the next it girl weren't looking for them in Cement City, Texas. She barely had enough money for the photo, let alone a trip to New York or California. Even though Juliet won a spelling bee in high school, college was out of the question. As Gwynn writes, it really didn't matter if she left high school as a graduate or a dropout. Her potential career paths were basically the same. She could be a factory worker, a maid, or a shop girl. None of those options appealed to her, so she looked toward the one option left to her, and that was to marry. But it wouldn't be the great romance she fantasized about in her diary. Roy Thornton was a high school classmate. He was a good-looking and well-dressed boy who was fun and always had money for dates, though Juliet never asked where he got the money. Wherever his income came from, he seemed to be able to support a wife, which was enough for her. Believing her beau to be perfect, she wouldn't allow any criticisms of him. Impulsively, she got a tattoo of 2 red hearts connected by arrows, and both of their names were inside the hearts. Juliet told her mother they had to marry immediately. True love couldn't be forced to wait. A few weeks before his 16th birthday, Juliet and Roy married on September 25th, 1926. But married life was certainly not what Roy had envisioned. Juliet suddenly couldn't bear to be apart from her mother, forcing her new husband to take her to her mother's every evening until Emma suggested the newlyweds move in with her. Hoping it would complete her fantasy, Juliet wanted a baby, but had trouble conceiving. In the book Fugitives, Emma hinted at possible gynecological problems that meant Juliet could never conceive. Nearly a year into their marriage, Roy disappeared for 10 days. Not wanting to explain his disappearance, he hit Juliet when she criticized him for leaving her. 2 months later, he left again, this time for 19 days. When he disappeared for a third time in December 1927, she suspected he was shacking up with another woman. Emma told her daughter to divorce her philandering husband, but Juliet wasn't ready for such an official step. In her diary, at age 17, she pledged not to take Roy back and to start 1928 as a free, albeit still married, woman. She believed Roy was gone for good, and with him went her financial support, so she began to search for a job but found nothing for weeks. She finally found a job at Hargrave's Cafe on Swiss Avenue in Dallas, but that meant she had to commute the long distance between the up-and-coming neighborhoods near Baylor College and Cement City. Her outgoing personality helped her with tips, as her weekly salary was no more than $3 or $4, which is between $55 and $75 today. Roy finally returned in January 1929, though a few months later, he would be arrested for robbery and sentenced to 5 years in prison. Juliet never saw her husband again, but she didn't bother divorcing him either. Continuing to wear his ring, she said that divorcing him while he was imprisoned wouldn't be right. Around the same time as Roy's arrest, she began working at a new establishment, Marco's, in downtown Dallas, near the courthouse and post office. With a high class of clientele, her tips were better, though she allegedly jeopardized the job by giving food away to those who couldn't afford to pay. When the manager warned her mother that Juliet would lose the job if she didn't stop, Juliet still continued, challenging her boss to fire her, which he never did. At least not until the stock market crash of October 1929, which led to the closure of Marco's and dozens of other downtown businesses. Finding only temporary work, Juliet longed for something to happen in her life. In early January 1930, she went to her brother's house for a party, walked through the doors, and found her Romeo. Once together, Romeo and Juliet committed a string of crimes, primarily robberies, across the Midwest. They aimed to collect the wealth they felt was denied to them for so long by robbing those who seemed to be doing well and the banks that had ruined so many farms during the Great Depression. They never intended to kill, but were more than willing to shoot their way out of a situation. They would eventually murder several people, including lawmen tasked with their capture. By March 1933, Ivan and his latest wife, Blanche, joined Romeo and Juliet, rounding out the gang. Hitting bangs from Texas to Minnesota, they also used hostages as shields before releasing them outside of town. Getting their hands on a camera, the gang shot photos of themselves. When the photos were eventually discovered in one of their hideouts, the world saw Romeo and Juliet holding weapons, smoking cigars, and holding onto one another. They were now an infamous criminal couple. Newspapers printed those photos, and Romeo and Juliet became one of the most famous couples in America. Despite their crimes, they were idolized by millions of people who saw them more as Robin Hood figures than actual criminals. Life was more difficult for them after the photos were published. People knew their faces, so motels and restaurants were no longer options. Camping and cooking around a campfire became their norm, with the men standing guard throughout the night. On June 10, 1933, Romeo missed road signs warning of a bridge under construction and flipped the car into a ravine. Juliet's leg was severely burned, causing the muscles to contract permanently. She needed help walking and doing simple things like using the restroom. Whether they knew it or not, this accident marked a turning point in their adventure together, the beginning of the end. A few weeks later, a shootout with law enforcement in Platte City, Missouri, left Ivan and Blanche wounded. Managing to escape with their wounded comrades, Romeo and Juliet had no choice but to abandon them in Dexter, Iowa. Ivan died 5 days later in the hospital in Perry, Iowa, from his head wounds. In the fall of 1933, Romeo and Juliet narrowly evaded authorities when they attempted to visit their family. During that same time, a grand jury in Dallas issued a murder indictment against them both for the January 1933 killing of Deputy Malcolm Davis, Juliet's first arrest warrant for murder. She would be blamed for another murder that occurred on Easter Sunday, 1934, though only one witness blames it on Juliet, while other evidence puts the gun in the hands of another gang member. As a final blow, the couple lost their public support after Romeo and Henry Methvin murdered a 60-year-old police officer named William Cal Campbell near Commerce, Oklahoma. A father and widower, he was far from the establishment targets they had hit in their earlier career. After Campbell's murder, which was attributed to Romeo and Juliet, with no mention of Methvin, the Dallas Journal ran a cartoon of an electric chair with a reserve sign and their names underneath. With 16 warrants against Romeo alone, dozens of law enforcement officers were on the couple's trail. In late May 1934, several learned that the couple intended to visit one of their safe houses, the home of Methvin's father in Bienville Parish, Louisiana. Already in place by 9 a.m. on May 23rd, the officers opened fire when they spotted the couple's 1934 Ford. According to the Dallas Dispatch, police fired approximately 130 rounds, emptying each of their weapons, in a scene that would be replicated by Hollywood as the incredibly stark and violent ending to the iconic movie Bonnie and Clyde. Clyde Barrow and Bonnie Parker, the infamous criminal couple of the Great Depression, cut a swath through the Midwest for more than 2 years before dying of multiple gunshot wounds on a dusty road in Louisiana. In their wake, the Barrow gang left at least 13 people dead, 9 of them law enforcement officers. While they may have begun their robbery spree to balance the scales of an unfair society, their desires for wealth and fame soon took over, pushing them for bigger and brasher targets. For that, they paid with their lives. To research this episode, historian Jen Erdman relied primarily on Jeff Gwynn's book, Go Down Together, The True Untold Story of Bonnie and Clyde. Additional sources included the family memoir, The True Story of Bonnie and Clyde by Emma Parker, Bonnie's mother, and Nell Barrow Cohen, Clyde's sister, as well as articles found in the Dallas Morning News, the Dallas Journal, and the Dallas Dispatch. The Catalyst is a production of Grab Bag Collab, created and engineered by Amanda Russman and narrated and edited by Amber Hunt. You can support us and our other programs at patreon.com/grabbagcollab. That's GRABBAGCOLLAB. Special thanks to Daisy Egan for being our first pass editor and a collaborator on Grab Bag. Music comes from Soundstripe Inc., my dad, Bruce Hunt, and my son, Hunt Van Benscoden.